Welcome back to week 2 of Art with Mr. Orlando. In this class we explore the elements of art and the principles of design. Last week we explored the principle of design pattern and the element of art line. This week we're going to explore the principle of design rhythm and the element of art value and shape. I have some forms that you can print out, or you can just go ahead and take a pencil and piece of paper. And last week I sent you these. If you were able to print them out, that's great, because you can actually do all of your work for this course on these two forms. And if you don't have that, then you can just do it on a scratch piece of paper. At the end of this course, this is kind of what you can turn in to get full credit for the course. Remember that in this class, we're going to explore the elements, which is kind of like an ingredient of art, and the principle, which is kind of like the recipe, okay? We'll also look at artwork by artists who use the principle and the elements that we're exploring, and then you'll also have a studio challenge at the end. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. The first element of art that we're going to explore is shape. If you have this form, you can go ahead and print it out, but if your family doesn't have a printer, that's okay. You can go ahead and create this yourself. You just need a sheet of paper, and then you're simply going to write out the elements of art on top. And then you're going to create a box. I'm going to do this really quickly, just to not spend too much time. And then I'll pull out another one that I've created. And then you're going to need to have 6 lines so that you have 7 rows. And let's see how I do. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Great. And then the first thing I would write up there is line, and then those. So I went ahead and did this before. I spent a little bit more time, not too much more time, but so this is the form that I will work with today as we explore the element of art shape. Now the first thing to note about the element of art shape is that there are 2 types. There are organic and geometric shapes. And the geometric shapes, as you can see, they're circle, square, triangle. They're usually shapes that have some type of geometric formula to create them. Whereas organic shapes are much more, the sides are a lot more curvy, and they're more the types of shapes that you'll see in nature. And so what I'm going to do, let's see, with that, is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to shape, and I'm going to create a definition. Now, the definition that I came up with was it's an enclosed line, and also that there are 2 types, but also that it's 2-dimensional. So for my definition here, I'm going to say a shape is an enclosed line, and it is 2-dimensional, or 2D. I'm also going to write that there are organic and geometric shapes. And then over here, I'm going to go ahead and create some examples. I think just to show my knowledge on this, I'm going to rate one area that says organic. And over here, I'm going to create shapes that are very organic. And then over here, I think I'm even going to put a line there, and I'm going to write geometric. And I'm just going to create some geometric shapes. Let's see. Oh. Great. So that's it for shape. Next we'll go on to value, which will take a little bit more time. I do have a printout for it. Let's see if I can find that printout, which really explains the next element of art. Next is value. I'm going to go ahead and recreate this. I'm going to do it really quickly, but I'll clean it up after so it looks a little bit better. And value is the degree of lightness to darkness. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little column, and I'm going to go from pure white all the way to a very, very dark shade. So what I'm going to end up doing is just creating like a single line that gets lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter until it gets absolutely white. And I'm going to straighten that out a little bit. So this is going to be my first. It's going to be I'm going to create a value scale. I'm even going to call it a value scale. Okay. The next what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create this formula for tinting. Tinting is when you add white. So I'm going to create plus that equals that. It's basically like math with colors. I'm going to choose a color. Let's say I'm going to choose red, I think. And then I'm going to add white. And then it's going to equal a color, and I just happen to know it's going to create pink. So I'm going to make that example. Then the next one is, so this is what we call tinting. The next one is shading. And when we shade a color, we're actually adding black. So I'm going to do yellow. I will do yellow, and then I will add black. And then it'll actually kind of equal almost like a mustard color. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So tinting is when you add white. Shading is when you add black. And then the next thing I'm going to create is another kind of a layer, but this time rather than doing a value scale just from white to black, I'm going to choose a color. And I think since I've already used red and yellow, I'm going to do the other primary color. I'll use blue. Okay, so I'm going to use blue. And what should happen is it should get very light. It'll go all the way to white here and then to black there. And in between, it will be light blue, lighter, lighter, lighter. It'll be blue, then it'll get darker and darker, but it'll be getting darker either with the hue of blue or the color black in here. And so that's what I'll be creating next. Okay. So here you can see I put the dark color black and the light color white. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to mix a little. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of, what's it called? A little bit of black to my white. I'm just going to create a gray. And then I'm just going to keep on kind of adding. And you'll see it makes a pretty quick shift. Oops. And I'm just going to keep on going. I think I might have gotten a little bit too dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it right to the center. And then I'm going to back chain it a little and see how I do there. Oh. The idea here is that you're going to go from light to dark, and it's always easier to actually add black because it's easier to kind of get that gradation. Now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to keep on adding a little bit of darkness. Okay. And black is just a very saturated, it's a very saturated, saturated hue. So what's happening here is we're just adding more and more kind of hue. Let's see. Had to add some more. Cool. So this is a good example of a value scale going from very white, light, all the way to an intense dark black. So next we're going to go ahead and do some tinting. And remember, tinting is adding white. So this initially, let's see, for tinting we're going to use red. And when I tint, I'll clean that up a little. So then all I'm going to do is go ahead and just add some white, and we'll see what happens. It should create like a, it should create a pink color. And yeah, it looks like a pretty intense pink color. So when red is tinted, it turns pink. The next what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and shade some yellow. So we're going to start off with this yellow here. And I'm just going to add a little tiny bit of black to this. I'm going to see what happens. You see it almost becomes like a green. I always kind of think of this more as like a mustard color because it tends to look a little bit, almost becomes like a green color. I always think of it as kind of a mustard yellow. So when we shade yellow by adding black, it becomes this kind of mustard color. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do the value scale similar to the way that I did it from white to black. But this time I'm actually going to do it with a blue hue and going from white to black. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put just blue right in the center. Okay. And you'll notice that it's fairly opaque. In other words, we can kind of see through it. And then I'm going to go ahead and start to add a little bit of white. Now, when you add white, it actually cuts down on the level of opaqueness, or kind of the way that you can kind of see through it. And then I'm just going to keep on adding more and more white. And hopefully we'll get light blue. Lighter. Lighter. And lighter. So what it should do is create kind of a white all the way to an intense blue. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and redo that just so that I'm working a little bit more with the opaque color of blue. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a touch of black. And I'm going to start that little shift from blue with a little bit of shading. So on one side I'm tinting, and on the other side I am shading. And you see it's starting to change really quickly. It might be changing too quickly for the way that I want to approach this. So we'll see if I can back chain. No, I think I'm gonna get to black a lot quicker than I did Okay. So what you see here is a value scale with blue, where it goes from white to light blue to darker blue, darker blue, darker blue, and then it starts to shade, and it starts to shade right here. And you can really see the difference between blue using white and blue using black. And it'll start to make that shift here, and so from here it starts to blue is being shaded until it goes all the way to an intense dark black. Okay, now that we're done with our worksheet for shape and value, and we've put it on our on kind of our work plan here, we have shape, we have value, and we have line from last week. Now we're ready to go on to our principle of design. I'm going to go ahead and move this out. Last week we did pattern, and pattern is a planned and predictable repetition of an element. And so remember that an element, the three elements that we've studied are line, shapes, and value. So when I'm here, what we have is a repetition of line. You see that it goes from purple to yellow, purple to yellow, purple to yellow, purple to yellow, and then up it goes purple to yellow, purple to yellow, purple to yellow. And so it's creating a pattern. Next is going to be rhythm, which we're going to explore. And I'm going to try something a little bit different this time. Rather than actually having a worksheet, I'm just going to work with this definition. I'm actually going to create a worksheet with you right now. So rhythm is one of the design principles. Let's see. It can be defined as a repetition of elements, which is very similar to pattern. So it is the repetition of elements that organize information so that your eyes move from one element to another element. The difference between rhythm and pattern is that rhythm is not predictable, which makes it more interesting. So if I'm to take that definition and to work with this and try and figure out how to do this, I'm going to go ahead and work with line, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing that I did before. Make sure that I'm going to go ahead and just create my lines here. This is very predictable so far. So here it's very predictable. We know that if I keep on going this way, it's going to be purple. Then we know it's going to be yellow. Then we know it's going to be purple. Do you know what the next color is? Yellow, blah, 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 blah. Goes on and on. It's just really predictable, right? But what would happen if all of a sudden I put in this one color and then kept on going? I'm not really too sure how dynamic this is, but it definitely breaks it up. And part of the reason why I did that is because I wanted to show that just by breaking up that pattern, the sense of predictability has been shifted. So you're not going to, the next one you're not too sure, is it going to be, will it continue to be yellow, or will it continue to be purple and yellow? Have we only seen a piece of the pattern? Like, there's lots of questions that get brought in by adding this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create, I'm still going to use line. And I think that rather than, yeah, I'm just going to use line. And I'm going to create, I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to use the same exact type of line. And notice what I've done here is I'm creating a pattern, right? This is a really good example of what I would think of as a pattern, and which is low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high. But if I take, what is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I take, and create 8 lines that are more in a rhythm, it might look something like this. So here we have 2 examples of 8. Now you'll notice that I did accidentally create another pattern here, but you'll notice that here it's really consistent. You know, it goes from low to high, low to high, low to high. Here what you're seeing is you're seeing 4, and you're actually seeing 4, but they're very different, right? So it's not establishing a predictable pattern. And so that is really what we mean by rhythm. And so there's that. If we actually did it with, let's say, shapes, right? Here's a very predictable repetition of shapes. You would know it's pretty easy to figure out what that repetition is, right? But if we explored it a little bit differently, and actually this becomes, I think, less dynamic. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 of 4, and I'm just going to go ahead and use the same amount of shapes. But putting them in very different place. So this is what we identify as a rhythm. And the reason, what happens is your eye naturally gathers similar elements. So if you were looking at this, and this was the entire piece, your eye would actually move from these groupings as a collective. And so if I was to come up with a definition of rhythm, I would think that rhythm is a repetition of elements. And the way that it differs is that it's not as predictable, which makes it a little bit more dynamic. So by now, you should have filled out 3 of the elements of art and 2 of the principles of design. I did this illustration for rhythm because I'm replicating these shapes, these red shapes, but they're not so well organized that they become a predictable pattern. In other words, wouldn't know exactly what that next element would be right there. Now, why don't we go ahead and look at some art and try to bring this all to life. I put down a red background because I just wanted you to be able to see the actual outline of the piece. This is a piece by an artist named Amanda Eichler, and I'd like you just to take a look at the actual work itself and just see where your eyes land. For most people, your eyes move from the typing at the top to the repetition of the objects on the bottom. And what I love about this is she's using a very good example. This is a good example of rhythm, where she's using the repetition of the element shape, but she's not putting it in a predictable order. Instead, she's actually put it with a little bit of an exchange. In other words, it moves a bit, which means it's not as predictable, which gives it a sense of rhythm or movement. She's also, of course, using shapes. They're all referencing squares, which is a geometric shape, but obviously they're not like perfect squares. They're even a little bit more organic in that sense. Also, she's using value. I don't know if you can tell, but up close around the box, there's this dark component of the color, right? And then it starts to almost like bleed out. And these two look like they've almost been completely erased. Now, what I love about this piece is it's such a really good use of space, right? There's tons of negative space, and you have to shift between the title and the actual observation of this moment down here.
And the title is Major Incident. And at the same time, you've got almost this very subtle piece. And then it has this title, Major Incident, which kind of draws me to wonder kind of like what these little shapes are representing and why these two shapes seem to have almost disappeared. Anyway, I thought it was a good example of what we were studying today: rhythm, value, and shape.
Well, your studio challenge this week is to create a work of art using the two elements of art that we studied this week, which were shape and value, and to also use a principle of design, rhythm. It could be anything you would like. It could be a sculpture, it could be a drawing, it could be a painting, or if there's some, like, I don't know, wood carving, whatever you'd like to do. Just do it safely and take a picture of it and go ahead and send it to me or to your teacher. And that's your studio challenge for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week. Make sure that you watch the films and that I've set aside for you on Mark Rothko and Jean Moreau, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.